Hello, my name is Dean Contover, and this is Current Buzz. Today we have Estefania Galvis, who's going to talk about question number 5. You're the field representative for question 5? Okay. Question 5 has to do with basically wage servers that I read the red book right here that you should read before you vote on the 5 questions that are up. And I have to go to the initiative petition. The minimum wage for tipped workers. What is a tipped worker? Can you explain what a tipped worker is? And you're probably going to talk the whole half hour because comprehending, because I never was a tipped worker. So it's a tough business. Being a tipped worker.
Tipped work is really hard work, and there is something that we all in the industry do agree on, and it's how hard and important the work of tipped workers is. But a tipped worker is someone that works in the front of the house, that is serving, that is bringing you food, that is taking your order, and someone that whose wages primarily come back through their tips. So if you're a bartender and if you're a server, those are tipped workers in the restaurant industry. There are other industries that have tipped workers, but it's prevalent in the restaurant industry.
Okay, so you mentioned something, the front worker. We're going to talk about a little terminology in regards to the restaurant business. You may not know it. You may go to a restaurant basically, and there's a tip worker in front of the house, and then there's the back of the house. Now, explain what the back of the house means in regards to tipping.
Yeah, so the back of the house is already covered by minimum wages. Those minimum wages means, according to the current system, that the back of the house workers do not need gratuity to be shared with them. And so the back of the house workers are your kitchen staff, your dishwasher, your busser. Here in Massachusetts, actually, your busser does count as part of the tip pooling of the front of the house that is allowed. But what we're going to be talking about is why the back of the house should also be allowed to be part of sharing the tips. Okay.
So the back, sometimes you share the tips, the front of the restaurant shares the tips with the bartender. Mm-hmm. Is that correct?
Yeah, there is. Because
they serve the drinks to
this is also where it gets complicated, right? Because the restaurant industry has multiple types of restaurants, right? There are restaurants that are service restaurants, there are bar restaurants, there are all these different configurations. So the reality is that tips are the property of the worker. So workers decide ultimately what they do with their tips. However, in Massachusetts and New York is the only 2 states where you can only decide what to do with your tips with front of the house workers.
Okay, all right. So I'm learning all this lingo, and so I go into a restaurant, I have good service, I tip 20%. From what I understand, that's not happening of late. It could be inflation, and it's international
problem.
Inflation, international problem. So I go to the restaurant, I tip 20%. Now, that server, that's what they call them. They don't call them waiters anymore, waitresses. They call them servers. So that's a new terminology. You may want to know that it's a server, right? So the server comes, I like the server. I want to give her cash and not put it on my credit card. And some restaurants have pooling, right? And some restaurant, it's the individual server that takes the money. What do you like?
I like pooling.
You like pooling?
Yeah.
But then again, the person that's doing a good job is pooling with somebody who's not pulling their weight.
Yeah, and I think that that is a very interesting situation because you a lot of the times can be the person that is doing a really good job, and then other times you can be the person that is not pulling your weight. And this is where the humanity of the worker comes in, because a worker not pulling in their weight can have anything to do with their health, something happened before work, they got a worrisome call, cannot leave work. There's so many reasons why people might not do well at work that what we really want to increment is the team effort of a place. We know that the service industry is a place where we want people to feel good. It's a community space.
Right.
And community takes helping each other out. And as a former worker, not only did I have bad days, but I also had really good days with people that were not doing well. And it felt good to be able to help each other out. So I do prefer, me and most of the servers that I've worked with and that are part of this campaign, we do prefer sharing.
Okay, I'm going to tell you a story. A person was given a $1,000 tip at a restaurant in Boston. And the person told him that was for him specifically. Of course, $1,000, you put it in your pocket and you walk out. For some reason, another server found out and reported it, and they let the person go because he never
Share the tip?
shared the tip. So
yeah, I think that this also speaks to how intense it is to be able to lose your job out of the nowhere in the industry.
Exactly.
Like this really points out that there is not a consistency or an accountability process on what is considered an offense that is a fireable offense. And this is the industry where there is the most unjust firing. And so that is actually something that has played on a lot in this campaign, because a lot of workers are afraid of supporting publicly the instance of making minimum wages plus tips, because if their bosses find out, like when they found out that this person didn't share their tips, they lost their job, they can just lose their job. There is really not a system of like, here in the U.S., people talk a lot about not guilty. What is it? Not found guilty
until proven guilty.
Until proven guilty, or X or Y, where you try to figure out, is this a fair way or is this a fair situation? In the restaurant industry, there's no fairness. Accountability.
There's no union or anything to protect.
Yeah, there's really workers are the most vulnerable workers, and the most vulnerable industry,
especially
is
single
the
mothers. There's a lot of I was reading where about a third of the servers are single mothers. They work in the evening and then they're home during the day. But
yeah, actually, it's super important to talk about single mothers, particularly women of color too, who hold these jobs, because one is an extra income. A lot of them need extra income. So a lot of them are not only having one job, but multiple jobs. And they work the slower shifts because it is more expensive to put their kid in daycare and go to work than going to work.
Yeah.
So it creates an environment where women and people in general, regardless, are made to have to accept unwanted behavior and unwanted, not even unwanted, unfair behavior just because of their need to maintain their job.
That's called sexual harassment? Is that what you mean?
No, it's all types of harassment, because harassment comes in many forms, right?
That's true.
And it comes from many playing fields. When we talk about sexual harassment, we talk particularly to this issue, is because there is unwanted moves from customers that customers feel embraced to do because they know that their tip is your wage. And so they know that you have to kind of deal with it so that you can make up your wages.
Right.
There's other types of harassment, like your manager can harass you by changing your shifts, by making your schedule very difficult, by asking you to come in tomorrow, and if you don't come in tomorrow, what?
Do a double shift.
Or do a double shift, and like if you don't accept a double shift, then you lose your job. Also, there is sadly, and I think that this is lowering, and I think that laws like this one help us prevent harassment. But there is a lot, in my experience, something I lived was having coworkers that were flirtatious with the manager and would get better shifts, or would be flirtatious with the owner and would get better work, better hours.
Right.
And so there is not an even playing field because of the culture, because of the wage and the economic structure. It allows for a lot of personal exchange rather than having an even field for everyone.
A lot of people don't know this, that the underlying thing in regards to ownership sometimes and service. But I digress. Why don't we talk about why this may change if we pass this law? Question number 5. Why don't we explain it? Now that we went through all the minutia of explaining
what the
goes
tip
on,
work
what goes
environment
on the front of the restaurant and the back of the restaurant.
Yeah, and I think I would add to finalize this that also we have different types of shifts. We have morning shifts, evening shifts, night shifts. All those shifts have different economic structures and have different roles that the worker plays. So a morning shift person is prepping the restaurant so that it can be ready for when it gets busy, right? So if you, like I was a shift builder is what I ended up becoming, which would be, I would come in at 10, 11 a.m., 4 to 5 days a week, and I would prep all the bar, I would be in touch with the kitchen, and then I would talk to customers during the day that are usually the customers that live in the neighborhood, and they would want to come back, and I would be like, oh, come back later, Mikey would be here, whatever, and they would bring people over, and then I am helping literally with my work the night shift so that they can do 80 drinks at once.
You would put up the table, set up the tables,
I would do inventory. I would make sure that all of the bottles of liquor were ready for when the rush comes in.
Right.
I would make sure that the limes are cut, that all of the things that are necessary for you to be
set up.
Yeah, everything that is necessary for you to be able to be a quick shift because there's too many people coming in. All of that is done by someone, and that person is there during the day. So those are like slower shifts, and especially during the week.
Are they paid are they tipped or?
They're tipped too. Yeah. So.
What about the person that's behind that should be setting that up? Should get a minimum wage.
Yeah.
Massachusetts, $15.
Yeah. So I had that job in a place that paid me $15.
Oh, okay.
And it was awesome because I loved my work. I loved being able to set up my bartenders and set up the customers.
You're very organized.
Yeah, I love it. It's great. And then I would get tips on top because I would have customers that would come and work from the restaurant, etc. And they would tip me high because even if they just had a coffee, they knew that they were like there with me. And so I would get a $30 tip plus my $15 an hour, and that made a very, 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 very big difference.
Okay.
Under the system, I would probably like make less. Under the current system, I would probably not. I would not make those $30 because those $30 would have gone to pay up for my wages.
Okay, let's talk about the law. It's going to be implemented in January of 2025 and end at 100% in January 2029. So explain what you guys want so the listening audience would understand what they're voting for.
Yeah.
Now that we went through the
So this is question 5 is a question that does a steady increase of wages up to the minimum wage for tipped workers for 5 years. At the 5th year, there is an allowance for workers to share their tips if they wish to share their tips. So that would mean that once front of the house workers have leveled up to the minimum wage, like the back of the house workers, everyone can start sharing. The way that the sharing works, and this is my personal experience and everyone will have a different way that they want to do it, is sometimes you tip out the back of your house 10%. So it would not be like you're doing 50-50 with everyone. It would be very depending on every restaurant is gonna make their own decisions on how the tip sharing will or not exist.
Okay, there's a Massachusetts state law that says the practice of requiring the pooling of tips from front of the house staff with the back of the house staff is currently outlawed in Massachusetts and Commonwealth of Massachusetts laws C149S 152AC. I mean, a lot of people don't know that right now. So
we're the only one out of 2 states in the country that don't allow for sharing with the back of the house.
Okay. But a lot of people do in Massachusetts.
Yeah.
I mean, it's done.
Yeah, that's the more and more conversations I'm having with folks here and there, the more I'm realizing that people are doing it. And this will just make it so nobody's going to get in trouble for doing it.
Oh, okay. So in other words,
This will just make it so you can totally do it.
You
and
could
like,
totally do it.
Yeah.
Okay, all right. So now, so my understanding, so I am a tipped worker. I work in front of the house. I'm a server. With this new law, if it's passed, I get minimum wage right away? I mean,
Yes.
every hour? Okay.
Every hour.
It's like California. I've been going to California.
Yeah.
And they've had this program for the
Yeah.
last 50 years, 40 years, whatever it is.
California has never had as a minimum wage.
But
It's always been a
and it-
minimum
and
wage.
it works, right?
And it works. And people, actually, it has one of the most amazing food industries. When I was in California, actually last year in February, it was my first time there. I was there with my cousin who also is in the industry. I had been working on One for Wage, and my cousin was really wondering, like, why are you doing this? I was in the kitchen. I had to like go through so much trouble. Everyone should have to go through this trouble. And then we went to dinner in California, and we looked at the bill. We had one of the most amazing meals we've had with my aunt and my cousin's girlfriend at the time.
Okay.
At the time.
Okay.
No, I think they're still together.
Okay, all right.
Caroline and
Okay.
Meg. And when we got the bill, we all were like, brace ourselves, this bill is gonna be so expensive. And actually, when we saw it, we were like, oh my God, you cannot have this food in New York or in Boston for this price. It was incredibly well made, incredible service. And my cousin picked up the bill for that table,
okay.
you know? And that trip was really important to us because he was a busser. My cousin is undocumented. And so this is an industry that has a lot of undocumented
That's
folks.
right.
And it's a...
If you go to Boston, most of the people in the back are undocumented or have papers, but they're basically Latina or Latinos that come from Central America or South America. Am I correct on that?
Yeah, there is a high-level population of immigrants
Yeah.
in the restaurant industry, particularly the back house, too. You're absolutely right about that. There's a racial difference between the people that you see in the front of the house and the back of the house, and there's also a gender and race difference between the people that you see in the front of the house in an everyday restaurant to a high-end restaurant. And you can go see it yourself. You will see a lot of men, white men, whether they're immigrants or not, they're white looking and know very good English in the high-end restaurants, and they're making a lot of good money. But it's the immigrants that are in the smaller restaurants in the front of the house that are usually women of color doing the work. And my cousin told me that his boss told him that this was bad for him. And when he told me that, I said, who told you it was bad for you? Why don't you think about it? And that's what I really wanted to encourage the everyday worker to do, to think about their interest over the interest of their boss and to vote themselves a raise that is far overdue.
Right. We're talking about question number 5. Read the book. The book is here.
The information for voters.
Yep.
State election.
Read the book. It's very important. Astana came in from what's the
Malden.
Malden, Mass. But One Fair Wage is that?
Yeah. So a little bit of a history on like how ballot questions work.
Yeah.
So One for Wage is a national organization that has been working to end sub minimum wages across the country.
Okay.
In Massachusetts, when you do a ballot question, you need to create a committee to run a ballot question.
Right.
I am the chair of that committee.
Oh, good for you.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
you were good.
I'm the chair of that committee to run the ballot question. For that ballot question to be in your ballot right now, we had to collect 140,000 signatures from voters registered
voters.
in Massachusetts, and we got signatures from all across the state. The number one answer we got from people when we were collecting signatures was, wait, what? People are not making the minimum wage already? I thought they were making the minimum wage already.
Now, good point. If you're a server at a restaurant, you get $6.25 an hour.
Yes.
You want to raise it to at least $15
Yes.
an hour, whatever the minimum wage is 5 years from now, whatever it is.
Yeah. And there is a percentile increase so that it is a smooth transition. And Massachusetts has already done this. When we fought for 15, the transition was also a smooth transition. And when we saw the opposition to higher wages, they also said everything was going to shut down, nothing was going to work, the sky was going to fall off.
Yeah.
And here we are, and people are having higher wages and we're still on business.
Okay.
But something that you mentioned that I really want to talk about is inflation, right? Inflation is here, but not only is inflation here and around the world, we also talked about the fact that the US is the only country in the world that works in a tipped minimum wage, which we are really behind on that.
Yeah, that's true.
And then the other thing I wanted to mention is that the opposition will say service charges are coming because of this law. And I have the bad news to tell you that service charges are here in Massachusetts. So everything keeps on going up,
Right.
but the wages of the workers. And we need to stop this trend.
From what I understand, people are not tipping 20%. There's less tips. There's certain groups of people who don't tip. It's not in your culture to tip.
Yeah,
so that kind of hurts a lot of people. And if you don't get tips, you're not going to stay at that restaurant. You're going to move on.
Yeah, and there's...
That restaurant's going to close.
Yeah, so a lot of restaurants post-pandemic have been struggling to retain or find staff because post-pandemic people realized they could find other jobs that allowed for them to have better lives in terms of being with their family or better schedules or better living situations. And so restaurants are struggling to find workers and also in terms of the tipping fatigue is coming. I saw this TikTok the other day. Are you gonna tip your landlord? I'm like, what is happening? No, like the tipping fatigue is coming because everywhere and everyone is adding tips on top of the wages. And the people that are suffering the most the impact are the actual servers. Because when you go to your coffee shop and that screen gets turned on to you, that worker in your coffee shop actually makes a minimum wage plus the tips that you're giving them. But the person that is bringing you your food is not making minimum wage.
Okay, so in other words, if I'm working, I get minimum wage, which is $15 an hour, which is if I work 4 or 5 hours, 6 hours in the evening at a restaurant, right? I'm going to get that $15 plus tips if
this law passes.
If
yeah.
this law passes.
And it would be in increments through the 5 years. The first year, the increment is about $3 per hour.
Okay, but people are getting $6.25 right at this moment.
Yes.
Service again $6.25 plus the tips.
And this is something that has been in talks at the national stage, right? People are talking about tipped workers. We know that after the pandemic, everyone realized how important tipped workers are. However, even though we realized that there was no material support for tipped workers, so one, this is a far due change. Two, the tipped workers are being paid $6.75, and the customer and the tipped worker are subsidizing the rest of the tip of the wage. So that $8 and change is coming out of the worker's pocket and the customer's pocket.
Plus taxes are taken out of tips, etc. I mean, everybody.
And that's where I was trying to get to. Thank you for the help there, because the tax conversation is very big right now. And something that we do agree, all of us in the industry, is that taxes are actually good for the worker, because it means that you'll be able to prove your income, you'll be able to apply for programs to be able to own a house, rent an apartment. These are very necessary. Taxes are very necessary.
Especially in Boston, it's expensive in regards to rent.
Very expensive. And if we talk about how expensive it is in Boston, the current wage does not qualify. Like even if you make, like the industry is very wide, right? There are like high-end restaurants and then there is like small restaurants. If you're in the high-end restaurant, this system is working perfect for you. And like, I understand that it is working for you. And we say you should also get a raise because everything's going up. But we want the system to work for those who it's not working for, who are the lower end folks. And so we're saying like, let's close that gap so that the industry can continue to grow. And like people feel positive about their experiences as workers in the industry. And people like me that left feel that we could come back if the opportunity was there to make the money that we can make. Because as much as I want to, for me, getting a high-end restaurant job at 33 is not a possibility. But if I wanted to get a low